The stars look different tonight, Ellen Dre thought as she stood beneath the biodome's transparent ceiling. More distant somehow, as if the universe itself was withdrawing from Kolari 3. Or perhaps it was just her imagination, fueled by the rumors that had been circulating through the colony for weeks. Rumors that would soon be confirmed in the most devastating way possible. It had been 312 years since the great intergalactic expansion, when humanity had spread across the stars with the arrogance that came from centuries of technological advancement. Kolari 3 had never been meant to be more than an agricultural outpost, a footnote in humanity's grand cosmic narrative. Its location, far from any major trade routes, with soil that required constant bioengineer intervention to remain fertile, had ensured that it remained exactly that, forgotten, underfunded, and ultimately expendable. Ellen ran her fingers through her short, practical brown hair, a habit she'd developed in the research labs whenever a problem seemed insurmountable. At 28, she was the youngest environmental engineer in the colony's small technical division. Her evaluation from the Alliance Military Potential Assessment had been blunt. Shows aptitude for ecosystem management, but lacks tactical thinking and physical capabilities necessary for defensive operations. Recommendation: non-military assignment only. That assessment had followed her across the stars, ensuring she would never rise above her station on this backwater world. Now, as she gazed at the colony's central hub, a cluster of interconnected biodomes housing just over 4,000 colonists, she wondered if that perceived weakness would be their collective death sentence. The Dravex were coming. Everyone knew it, though the Alliance had yet to make an official announcement to the outer colonies. They didn't need to. The pattern was clear to anyone monitoring the emergency channels. Planet after planet had gone silent in a systematic wave of destruction, moving inexorably toward the outer rim, toward Kolari 3. The Dravex were unlike any threat humanity had faced before, not a traditional army with ships and weapons, but a biological force of destruction. Accounts from the few survivors described them as a collective organism that consumed all biological matter in its path, adapting to and overwhelming any defense system it encountered. They didn't negotiate, they didn't communicate, they simply arrived, consumed, and moved on, leaving dead worlds in their wake. Ellen's communicator buzzed at her hip, pulling her from her dark thoughts. It was Maya Corrin, the colony's chief medical officer and Ellen's closest friend since their arrival 5 years ago. "You need to get to the landing pad." Maya's voice was tight with urgency. "The supply ship is early." Ellen frowned. "Early? By how much?" 2 weeks. And Ellen, there are rumors it's not here for supplies. The unspoken implication hung in the air between them. Evacuation ships had been promised to all Alliance colonies, but everyone knew there weren't enough to go around. Priority would be given to strategic locations, military outposts, and centers of economic importance. Kolari 3 was none of those things. "I'll be right there," Ellen said, already moving toward the transport shuttle that connected the agricultural dome to the main colony hub. By the time she arrived, a crowd had already gathered around the landing pad where the massive Alliance freighter had docked. Its hull bore the scars of rapid space travel, evidence of a journey made in haste rather than with careful navigation. As the loading ramp descended, Ellen pushed her way through the crowd, her slight frame allowing her to slip between the anxious colonists. Governor Talia Mercer stood at the front, her normally composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. Beside her stood the colony's security chief, Leon Voss, a former Alliance soldier who had been assigned to this backwater as punishment for some long-forgotten insubordination. The ship's captain emerged, flanked by armed guards, not the usual merchant marines, but actual Alliance military personnel. Their presence confirmed what everyone feared. "Governor Mercer?" The captain nodded curtly. "I have orders to collect essential personnel and regional leadership for immediate relocation to Alliance secure facilities." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Essential personnel, leadership. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for everyone else. "Captain," Mercer's voice was steady despite the circumstances. "We have over 4,000 colonists here. Your ship could accommodate at least half that number." The captain's face remained impassive. "My orders are specific. Governor, 48 names on this list. We depart in 6 hours. The crowd erupted in panic. Shouts of anger and despair filled the landing pad as the reality of their situation became clear. They were being abandoned. Ellen slipped away from the chaos, her mind racing. She made her way to the communications center, a small facility on the eastern edge of the main dome. If the Alliance was evacuating leadership, there would be records, communications, something that might explain what was really happening. The communications officer, a young man named Taro, barely glanced up when she entered. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands trembling slightly as they moved over the control panel. "You heard?" he asked without looking at her. Ellen nodded. "I need to see the transmission logs from Alliance Command for the past week." Taro laughed bitterly. "Official channels have been silent for days, but—" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There was something else, a data packet that came through on an emergency frequency about 6 hours ago. It was corrupted, but I managed to salvage pieces." He pulled up a fragmented transmission on his screen. Most of it was garbled, but certain phrases stood out with terrible clarity. "We colonies designated non-viable. Dravek's trajectory confirmed. Estimated arrival window 20 standard days. No defense assets to be allocated to zones marked red. Kolari 3 included in non-recovery designation." Ellen felt her blood run cold. 20 days. That was all they had left. "Does the governor know?" she asked. Taro shook his head. "I only finished piecing this together an hour ago. Then the ship arrived and—" He gestured helplessly at the chaos visible through the window. "Send me everything," Ellen said, "and keep this between us for now. The last thing we need is mass panic before we have a plan." As she left the communications center, a different alarm began to sound from the agricultural research facility where she worked. Emergency protocols had been drilled into every colonist, and this particular alarm indicated a level 3 containment breach, serious but not colony-threatening. Ellen broke into a run. The research facility housed the colony's seed bank, experimental crops, and the bioengineer labs that worked tirelessly to keep Kolari 3's stubborn soil capable of supporting Earth crops. A breach there could threaten their already precarious food supply. When she arrived, she found her research team gathered around an excavation site in the subsurface testing area. This section had been under development for months, as they explored methods to cultivate crops deeper in the soil where radiation levels were lower. "What happened?" Ellen demanded as she approached Dr. Kenta Takada, the senior agricultural scientist. Dr. Takada pointed to a perfectly circular hole in the ground, about 2 meters in diameter. "The excavator hit something. At first, we thought it was just an unusual rock formation, but—" He handed her a scanner. "It's giving off biological and technological signatures, unlike anything in our database." Ellen studied the readings, her professional curiosity momentarily overriding her anxiety about the colony's fate. The object was emitting a low-level electromagnetic field with a rhythmic pattern that suggested artificial design. Yet, it also contained compounds that matched organic matter. "How far down?" she asked. "About 15 meters. We've stopped excavation until we can determine what it is." Ellen made a quick decision. Seal off this section and bring in the portable containment field. Whatever this is, we need to understand it before we decide what to do. As the team moved to follow her instructions, Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that their discovery was somehow connected to the larger crisis facing the colony. 20 days until the Dravex arrived. A strange object of unknown origin beneath their feet, and an alliance that had already written them off as a lost cause. That night, sleep eluded her. The data from the mysterious object and the fragments of the Alliance transmission swirled in her mind, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite assemble. Around midnight, she gave up trying and returned to the research facility. The night shift was minimal, just a security guard who nodded to her as she passed and a junior researcher monitoring the containment field. Ellen dismissed them both, assuring them she would maintain the necessary protocols. Alone with the object, now partially excavated and revealing a smooth, metallic surface inscribed with symbols unlike any human language, Eileen began running deeper scans. Hours passed as she worked, the soft hum of equipment the only sound in the empty lab. It was nearly dawn when the pattern finally revealed itself. The electromagnetic pulse emitted by the object wasn't random, it was responsive. It changed subtly whenever living organisms came near it, as if sensing them. Ellen's hands flew over the controls, adjusting parameters, testing her theory. The object was a biological transmitter of some kind, ancient yet sophisticated beyond current human technology. And it was sending out signals to something, or someone. The implications were staggering. If this technology predated human settlement on Kalari 3, who had built it? And more importantly, could it somehow be connected to the Dravex? Her communicator buzzed urgently, interrupting her train of thought. It was Maya. Ellen, where are you? The governor's called an emergency council meeting. The evacuation ship left an hour ago, with only 30 people on board. The governor stayed behind. Ellen glanced at the time and swore under her breath. She'd been working through the night without realizing it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And Maya, I think I found something important. The council chamber was packed when Ellen arrived. Governor Mercer stood at the center, surrounded by the remaining colonial leadership. Her face showed the strain of someone who had made an impossible choice, staying behind with her people rather than saving herself. The Alliance has abandoned us, Mercer was saying as Ellen slipped into the back of the room. But that doesn't mean we're without options. We have 20 days before the Dravex arrive. According to the intelligence we've received, that gives us time to prepare. A man Ellen recognized as Daro Ven, the colony's logistics manager, stood up. Prepare for what? Exactly. The Dravex have overwhelmed military installations with planetary defense systems. We have nothing but agricultural equipment and a few security personnel. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The hopelessness in the room was palpable. We have something else, Ellen said, her voice cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to her. We've discovered an artifact beneath the agricultural dome. It's technological in nature, but has biological components. And it's old, predating human settlement by thousands of years. At least. Silence fell over the room as she described her findings. When she finished, Dr. Takeda stood up, his expression skeptical. Even if this object is as significant as you believe, Engineer Dre, how does it help us against the Dravex? Ellen took a deep breath. The Dravex aren't just mindless destroyers. According to the data we have, they're highly evolved biological entities that target other biological systems. They sense life and consume it. But what if? What if we could make them think there's no life here to consume? Leon Voss, the security chief, laughed bitterly. And how exactly would we do that? Stop breathing? Not exactly, Ellen replied, undeterred. But I believe this ancient device is capable of manipulating biological signatures on a planetary scale. If we can understand it and harness it, we might be able to mask our presence, make Kolari 3 appear dead to the Dravex. The room erupted in a mixture of hope and disbelief. Governor Mercer raised her hands for silence. Engineer Dre, I want you to assemble a team immediately. If there's even a chance this could work, we need to pursue it. She addressed the rest of the room. Meanwhile, we'll prepare evacuation shelters in the deepest parts of our facilities. If we can't hide from the Dravex, we'll try to outlast them underground. As the meeting dispersed, Darrow Venn approached Ellen, his expression unreadable. You're giving them false hope, he said quietly. You have no idea if this artifact can do what you claim. Ellen met his gaze steadily. I'm giving them something to work toward instead of waiting to die. What's your alternative? Venn leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. There are other options. The Dravex don't destroy everything in their path indiscriminately. They've been known to spare certain areas that provide something they value. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that surrender might be preferable to extinction. If we could communicate with them, offer them something. Ellen stepped back, disgusted. They don't communicate, Venn, they consume. And I won't bet our survival on becoming pets or slaves to a species that views us as nothing more than biological material. Venn's expression hardened. Then you'd better make sure your ancient technology works. Engineer. Because in 20 days, your principles won't matter much if we're all dead. He walked away, leaving Ellen with a growing sense of unease. Venn wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. If he was considering capitulation, he wouldn't be alone. Fear had a way of dividing people, turning them against each other when unity was most critical. She pushed the thought aside and focused on the task at hand. With Dr. Takeda and Maya's help, she assembled a team of the colony's brightest minds, engineers, biologists, physicists, and computer specialists. They established around-the-clock operation at the excavation site, working in shifts to uncover the artifact's secrets. Days passed in a blur of discovery and frustration. The device, which they now understood to be some kind of biological transmitter, revealed its complexities layer by layer. It operated on principles that defied conventional science, using quantum entanglement to affect biological matter across vast distances. Meanwhile, the colony transformed around them. Under Governor Mercer's direction, preparations for the Dravex arrival continued on multiple fronts. Shelters were reinforced, supplies were rationed and distributed, and a network of underground tunnels was expanded to connect key facilities. But as the countdown to the Dravex arrival passed the halfway mark, tensions within the colony reached a breaking point. Resources were strained, patience was wearing thin, and Ellen's team had yet to produce a working defense system. 10 days before the projected arrival, Ellen made a breakthrough, working with samples of various biological materials. She discovered that the ancient device could indeed manipulate biological signatures, effectively making living tissue appear non-living to external scanning. It's like a biological cloaking device, she explained to Governor Mercer and the Council, but on a scale I've never seen before. If we can amplify its effect to cover the entire colony, we might be able to make Kolari 3 appear lifeless to the Dravex. How long to implement? Mercer asked. Ellen hesitated. That's the problem. At its current power level, the device could maybe cover a few hundred square meters. We need to increase its output exponentially. And how do we do that? We tie it into the colony's power grid, but even that won't be enough. We need to create a network of amplifier stations around the colony perimeter. And... She paused, knowing her next words would be controversial. We need to shut down all biological activity on the surface. The implications were clear. They would have to abandon their crops, release their livestock, and retreat underground, leaving the surface of Kalari 3 to actually die. The colony would have to feign death by killing a part of itself. The debate was heated. Many argued that without their agricultural infrastructure, they would be condemning themselves to a slow death by starvation even if they survived the Dravex. Others pointed out that without the plan, there would be no survival at all. In the end, desperation won out over caution. The council approved Ellen's plan, and work began immediately to construct the amplifier network while simultaneously preparing for a complete withdrawal from the surface. But not everyone was convinced. Darrow Ven and a growing faction of colonists openly opposed the plan, arguing that it was based on unproven technology and would destroy their way of life. They advocated for attempting communication with the Dravex, offering surrender in exchange for survival. The colony was splitting in two, and time was running out. 8 days before the Dravex arrival, Ellen was working late in the lab when the power suddenly cut out. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. Her communicator remained silent, a bad sign. The colony-wide emergency system should have activated immediately. She made her way cautiously to the door, only to find it locked from the outside. Through the small window, she could see armed figures moving in the corridor, not security personnel, but civilians carrying improvised weapons. A coup was underway. For hours, Ellen remained trapped in the lab, attempting to reach anyone on her communicator without success. Finally, the door slid open to reveal Darrow Ven, flanked by 2 men with pulse rifles. "I'm sorry it came to this, Engineer Dre," Ven said, his voice eerily calm. "But your plan would doom us all. We've received word from off-world contacts. The Dravex can be reasoned with if approached correctly." "That's a lie," Ellen replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "No one has successfully communicated with them. They're not intelligent in the way we understand it. They're a biological force following evolutionary imperatives." Ven smiled thinly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the Alliance has been lying to us all along, using the Dravex as an excuse to abandon non-essential colonies and consolidate power. Either way, we're taking control of the colony and implementing our own survival strategy." Ellen was taken to a makeshift detention area, the colony's rarely used brig, now filled with Governor Mercer, Leon Voss, Dr. Takeda, and others who had opposed Ven's faction. "They've taken the central hub and communications center," Mercer informed her quietly. "But they don't have everyone. Maya and a group of engineers managed to escape to the Southern Agricultural Dome. What about the artifact, the amplifier network?" Dr. Takeda shook his head. "They've shut down the excavation site. Ven plans to use the artifact as a bargaining chip with the Dravex. He believes it's valuable enough to buy our survival." Ellen closed her eyes, fighting against despair. All their work, all their preparation, undone in a single night by fear and misguided hope. But as she sat in the dimly lit detention cell, an old conversation came back to her. Months ago, she had spoken with one of the colony's eldest residents, a farmer named Sareth who had been among the first settlers on Kalari 3. He had told her stories passed down from even earlier explorers, tales of ancient civilizations that had once inhabited this world. "They knew things we've forgotten," Sareth had said, "ways of living with the land, not just on it. They believed in the invisible breath that protects all life, a force that even the greatest predators respected. At the time, Ellen had dismissed it as the rambling of an old man steeped in folk wisdom. Now, she wondered if there was truth hidden in those stories, if the artifact they'd discovered was connected to those ancient inhabitants. Perhaps there was more to learn from Kalari 3's past. 4 days before the Dravek's arrival, opportunity came in the form of a power fluctuation that temporarily disabled the detention area's security system. With Leon Voss's help, Ellen and a small group managed to escape, slipping through maintenance tunnels to avoid Ven's patrols. They made their way to the Southern Agricultural Dome, where Maya had established a resistance headquarters. The reunion was brief but emotional. Many had feared the worst when communications were cut. Ven's people control most of the colony infrastructure, Maya explained, showing Ellen a makeshift map. But they're spread thin. Most colonists have chosen to stay neutral, locking themselves in their quarters and waiting to see who prevails. "We don't have time for a civil war," Ellen said. "The Draveks will be here in 4 days. We need to restart the amplifier network." "Impossible," one of the engineers argued. "They've locked down the power grid. Without it, the amplifiers are useless." Ellen thought of the artifact, of its strange biological components and the energy it emitted even without external power. Maybe we don't need the grid. The artifact itself is a power source. We just need to understand how to tap into it. She turned to an elderly woman sitting quietly in the corner, Sareth's widow, who had joined the resistance after Ven's people had taken her husband for questioning. "Your husband told me stories about the ancient people who lived here before us. Do you remember any details about how they protected themselves?" The old woman's eyes lit up with recognition. Sareth believed they lived in harmony with the world, becoming part of its biological rhythms rather than imposing their own. When danger came, they would retreat beneath the soil, becoming one with the planet until the threat passed. It was a metaphorical description, but something about it resonated with what Ellen had observed in the artifact. It didn't generate energy in the conventional sense. It channeled it from the biological processes of the planet itself. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," she realized aloud. "We don't need to shut down all biological activity on the surface. We need to synchronize with it, redirect it. The amplifiers shouldn't be suppressing life signs. They should be harmonizing them with the planet's natural rhythm." The concept was radical, requiring a complete redesign of their approach. But with time running out and resources limited, it was their only option. Over the next 3 days, Ellen and the resistance worked tirelessly, constructing a new network of smaller amplifiers that could be deployed covertly. Using components salvaged from agricultural equipment and medical devices, they built devices that tapped into the biological energy of plants and soil, a pale imitation of the artifact's technology, but potentially effective enough to create a colony-wide effect when used in concert. The night before the Draveks were due to arrive, Ellen led a small team back to the excavation site where the artifact remained. Ven's guards were minimal. Most of his forces had been redeployed to defend against what he believed would be a frontal assault by the resistance. Using access codes provided by Dr. Takeda, they entered the secured area and found the artifact partially dismantled. Ven's scientists had been attempting to understand its technology, likely to present it as an offering to the Draveks. "Can we still use it?" Maya asked as Ellen examined the damage. Ellen nodded slowly. "Its core is intact, and now that they've opened it up, I can see how it's designed." She pointed to a series of crystalline structures within the device. "These aren't just power conduits, they're biological resonators. They're designed to create a field that masks biological signatures by putting them out of phase with standard detection methods." Working quickly, they reconnected the essential components and integrated the artifact with their makeshift amplifier network. As they finished, an alarm sounded throughout the colony, but not the standard emergency alert. This was different. A high-pitched wail that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. "They're here," someone whispered. "The Dravex have arrived early." Initial reports from the few functioning external sensors confirmed their worst fears. The Dravex manifestation was massive, a biological cloud that blotted out the stars as it descended toward Kalari 3. Unlike conventional invaders, they didn't arrive in ships. They traveled as a collective organism, a swarm of microscopic entities that joined together as needed to form larger structures. In the colony's control center, Daro Ven watched in mounting horror as his carefully planned communication attempt failed. The signals he had been broadcasting, which he believed would identify the colony as a potential symbiotic partner rather than prey, went unanswered. The Dravex cloud continued its inexorable approach, showing no sign of understanding or mercy. "Evacuate to the shelters," he ordered finally, his voice hollow with defeat. "Seal all external access points." But it was too late. The cloud had already reached the outermost biodomes, enveloping them in darkness. The transparent structures designed to withstand Kalari 3's harsh climate offered no resistance to the microscopic Dravex organisms that seeped through every minute crack and seam. In the excavation site, Ellen and her team worked frantically to complete the final connections for their makeshift defense system. Through Maya's medical monitoring equipment, they could track the Dravex's progress through the colony, a wave of biological consumption that devoured everything in its path. "We're out of time," Maya said, her voice tight with urgency. "They've breached the central hub. Hundreds of people are trapped there." Ellen looked at the artifact, at the network of amplifiers they had cobbled together from spare parts and desperation. It wasn't ready. It might never be ready. But they had no choice. "Activate it," she ordered. The effect was immediate and unexpected. As the ancient device powered up, a pulse of energy radiated outward, rippling through the colony in concentric waves. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, one by one, the colony's systems began to shut down, not due to damage, but as if responding to some primal command. Lights dimmed, environmental controls shifted to minimal output, and most surprisingly, the plant life throughout the agricultural domes began to change. Leaves curled inward, photosynthesis slowed to imperceptible levels, and growth processes suspended, not dying, but entering a state of deep dormancy. The colony wasn't just playing dead, it was entering a form of biological hibernation. Through the remaining sensor feeds, they watched in amazement as the Dravex advance slowed, then stopped. The cloud of microscopic organisms that had been consuming everything in its path now moved with apparent confusion, as if searching for prey that had suddenly vanished. "It's working," Dr. Takeda whispered. "They can't sense us anymore." For hours, they maintained the field, watching as the Dravex cloud moved erratically across the colony, probing but no longer consuming. Occasionally, it would coalesce into larger forms, tentacle-like structures that tapped against biodomes and buildings as if testing them before dispersing again. Then, something unexpected happened. The Dravex cloud began to withdraw from certain areas, pulling back from the excavation site and the surrounding facilities where the artifact's influence was strongest. "They're not just confused," Ellen realized. "They're afraid. The biological signature we're generating, it's not just masked, it's threatening to them somehow." As if confirming her theory, the Dravex cloud began to retreat from the colony entirely, pulling back toward the upper atmosphere. The sensors showed it regrouping, forming a tight spiral above Kalari 3, as if debating whether to attempt another approach. And then, a new alarm sounded, this one from the colony's central hub, which had fallen silent hours earlier. On the few working monitors, they could see chaos erupting. The Dravex hadn't withdrawn from that area. They were attacking with renewed vigor, tearing through the biodome with frightening efficiency. "I don't understand," Maya said, checking the sensor readings. "Why there and not here?" The answer came moments later when they detected a transmission originating from the central hub, a biological signal pulsing outward. Distinct from the harmonized field they had created, someone was deliberately attracting the Dravex. "Ven," Ellen said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "He still thinks he can communicate with them, make a deal." The signal continued, growing stronger as the Dravex consumed more of the central hub. Through fragmented video feeds, they caught glimpses of the horror unfolding, colonists running in panic, transparent walls bulging inward as the biological mass pressed against them, and at the center of it all, Darrow Ven, standing before a makeshift transmitter, his arms outstretched as if in welcome. His final expression, captured in a freeze frame before the feed cut out, was one of terrible comprehension, the understanding that came too late that the Dravex did not negotiate, did not spare, did not recognize anything but their own imperative to consume. The attack on the central hub continued for hours, a localized feeding frenzy that stood in stark contrast to the rest of the colony, where the Dravex had withdrawn almost entirely. By dawn, it was over. The central biodome was a devastated husk, its internal structures consumed down to the inorganic components. But the rest of Kolari 3 remained intact. As the sun rose, the few functioning external sensors showed the Dravex cloud reforming in the upper atmosphere, then accelerating away from the planet at tremendous speed, as if fleeing from something they feared more than they desired what remained of the colony. Slowly, cautiously, Elin's team began to deactivate the artifact, allowing the colony's systems to return to normal operation. Plants unfurled their leaves, power systems reset, and environmental controls resumed standard function. The colonists emerged from hiding, marveling at their unexpected survival. In the days that followed, the full extent of what had happened became clear. The Dravex had consumed approximately 20% of the colony, primarily the central hub and administrative facilities where Ven's faction had made their stand. The rest, protected by the ancient artifacts field, had survived virtually untouched. A week after the attack, a small Alliance scout ship appeared in orbit, approaching cautiously as if expecting to find nothing but ruins. When they established communication with the surviving colonists, their disbelief was palpable. "We detected the Dravex signature in your system," the Alliance commander explained during the initial contact. "By all our models, Kolari 3 should have been completely consumed. How did you survive?" Ellen, now serving as the colony's acting environmental director under the Reformed Council, chose her words carefully. "We adapted. We found a way to make ourselves invisible to them." The Alliance sent a research team immediately, eager to understand a defense that had eluded their best military minds. They examined the artifact, studied the amplifier network, and interviewed survivors. But the technology defied their understanding. It operated on principles that seemed to blend advanced physics with biological processes in ways that current science couldn't fully explain. "We want to relocate this technology to a secure Alliance facility," the lead researcher eventually declared, "and we're prepared to evacuate all surviving colonists to safer worlds." Governor Mercer, who had survived the attack in one of the underground shelters, called for a colony-wide vote. The decision was nearly unanimous. They would stay. Kolari 3 was their home, and now they knew how to defend it. Ellen stood at the edge of the agricultural dome, watching as colonists worked to replant fields that had temporarily dormant during the attack. The damage was substantial, but not insurmountable. With time and care, Kolari 3 would recover. The artifact remained where they had found it, reburied beneath the soil, but now connected to a permanent monitoring station. They had learned to use its technology, but still understood only a fraction of its capabilities. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, Ellen would sit beside it, wondering about the civilization that had created it, a people who had apparently faced threats like the Dravex before and found a way to survive not through superior firepower, but through biomimicry and adaptation. 6 months after the attack, the Alliance officially reclassified Kolari 3 from an agricultural outpost to a research station of strategic importance. Resources that had been denied for decades suddenly became available. New colonists arrived, many of them scientists eager to study the technology that had repelled the galaxy's most feared predator. Ellen took on the role of chief researcher, heading the project to understand and expand upon the ancient technology. But she insisted on one fundamental principle: they would not weaponize it. The artifact had saved them not by destroying the Dravex, but by speaking to them in a biological language they understood, the language of threat and territory, of predator and prey. "We didn't win because we were stronger," she explained to a newly arrived Alliance military attaché who had suggested adapting the technology for offensive purposes. "We won because we understood how to become something the predator chose to avoid." There's a difference. As the years passed, Kolari 3 thrived, transforming from a forgotten agricultural outpost to a center for biological research and adaptive technology. The ancient artifact yielded its secrets slowly, revealing connections to a vast network of similar devices scattered across the galaxy, silent sentinels left by a civilization that had faced the Dravex or something like them eons before humanity reached the stars. Other colonies adopted variations of what became known as the Kolari defense, biological adaptation rather than confrontation. Not all succeeded. The technology required a deep connection to a planet's inherent biological rhythms that some worlds could not support, but many did, creating pockets of resistance in a galaxy where military might had previously been the only measure of security. On the 10th anniversary of the attack, Ellen Dray, now Dr. Ellen Dray, following her groundbreaking research, stood before a gathering of colonists and visitors in the rebuilt Central Plaza. A memorial had been erected, bearing the names of those lost in what history now called the Kolari Stand, the first and only successful defense against a full Dravex consumption event. "We remember today not just those we lost, but what we learned," she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "The Alliance military potential assessment once classified me as unsuited for defensive operations because I lacked tactical thinking. They weren't wrong. I don't think like a warrior. But sometimes survival doesn't require warriors. Sometimes it requires those who understand that strength can take many forms." She gestured to the flourishing biodomes around them, to the fields and forests that had been temporarily dormant during the attack but now grew with renewed vigor. The Dravex are still out there, still consuming worlds that fight back with conventional weapons. But here, and on the growing number of worlds that have adopted our approach, life continues. Not because we defeated the predator, but because we learned to speak its language, the language of biological imperative. We told it, in terms it could understand, that we were not prey, that there are some forms of life even the deadliest hunters choose to avoid. As night fell over Kolari 3, Ellen returned to the research facility where it had all begun. The artifact, now partially exposed in a secured chamber, pulsed with a gentle blue light that synchronized with the planet's natural biological rhythms. Watching it, Ellen was reminded of something the old farmer Sareth had told her years ago, before the attack, before their world had changed forever. The strongest tree is not the one that stands rigid in the storm. He had said, it's the one that bends without breaking, that adapts to the wind rather than fighting it. Kolari 3 had bent, but not broken. In a galaxy where military might define survival, they had found another way, one based not on the strength to destroy, but on the wisdom to adapt. And in doing so, they had outlasted the deadliest species the galaxy had ever known. When force failed, it was weakness that knew how to adapt that sent the predator away.